The world has never rewarded innocence for long, because from the moment the first tribes gathered around firelight and realized that trust could be exploited, power stopped being about strength alone and became a quiet contest of perception, patience, and psychological control, a contest that has shaped empires, destroyed dynasties, and determined who survives history and who is erased by it. And if you listen closely to the echoes of the past, you begin to hear the same pattern repeating. Again and again, from ancient courts to modern boardrooms, from shadowed palaces to public stages, a pattern built not on open violence but on something far more dangerous, something invisible yet decisive, a form of intelligence born from betrayal, refined through humiliation, and sharpened by loss, the intelligence of those who learned that reacting emotionally was a luxury they could not afford. Because history does not belong to the loudest voices but to the quiet minds that learn to wait, observe, and strike only when the moment could not be wasted. And long before the word psychology existed, rulers understood that controlling people meant understanding what they feared, what they desired, and what they believed about themselves, which is why the most powerful figures in history rarely revealed who they truly were, because mystery was not weakness but armor. And calculated opacity became one of the earliest weapons of survival, seen in the courts of ancient China where emperors ruled behind screens, revealing nothing while officials guessed at intentions and destroyed themselves through assumption, seen in Rome where Augustus presented himself as a humble servant of the Republic while quietly consolidating absolute power, saying little, promising less, and letting others underestimate him until resistance became impossible. Because when people think they know you, they stop watching you, and when they stop watching, you move freely, and alongside this concealment grew the art of the adaptive persona, the understanding that power demanded flexibility, not authenticity in the modern sense, but effectiveness, the ability to become what the situation required without ever losing the core self beneath the mask, a skill mastered by figures like Queen Elizabeth I, who could speak as a warrior to soldiers, as a daughter to the people, and as an equal to kings, changing tone, posture, and presence without ever surrendering control, because those who refuse to adapt are broken by environments that do not care about consistency. And as centuries passed, this adaptability merged with another dangerous realization that attachment was the true chain that bound human beings, and those who feared loss could always be controlled, which is why detachment became the silent discipline of survivors, from Stoic philosophers who trained themselves to accept loss before it arrived, to generals who entered battle knowing victory was uncertain but clarity required emotional distance. And nowhere was this lesson more brutally applied than in the rise and fall of monarchs who loved too deeply or trusted too fully, because history is littered with rulers who lost thrones not to enemies but to their own desperation, while those who could walk away, who did not cling to approval or affection, gained leverage without raising a hand. And this detachment fed directly into one of the most misunderstood forces in human history, silent leverage, the power that grows not from commands but from presence, not from demands but from inevitability, a power understood by figures like Cardinal Richelieu, who rarely shouted, rarely threatened, yet positioned himself so carefully within the machinery of the French state that nothing moved without his awareness, making others dependent, while he remained replaceable only in theory, because real leverage is never announced, it is felt. And silence has always been its most effective language, as seen in negotiations where pauses spoke louder than words and in alliances where the unspoken alternative carried more weight than any threat, and yet power alone was never enough without understanding people, which is why psychological echo became the invisible bridge between rulers and the ruled, the technique of reflecting desires back to those who could not articulate them. A practice evident in the speeches of revolutionary leaders who framed personal suffering as collective destiny, making individuals feel seen, understood, and valued, not by solving their problems immediately but by naming them, because humans have always followed those who seem to understand their pain, and this understanding allowed leaders to guide behavior without force, shaping outcomes by aligning ambition with identity. And as moral simplicity collapsed under the weight of real consequences, history moved further into gray territory, where ambiguous morality became a necessity rather than a flaw, because pure goodness, while admirable, rarely survives contact with reality, and those tasked with protecting nations or preserving stability were forced to make decisions that would be judged harshly by those who never carried their burden. Decisions that sacrificed the few to save the many, decisions that ended lives, careers, or reputations to prevent larger disasters, and while some abused this ambiguity to justify cruelty, others understood it as pragmatic ethics, the recognition that outcomes mattered more than appearances, a truth faced by wartime leaders who authorized devastating actions to end conflicts sooner, knowing history would debate them forever, but knowing indecision would have cost even more lives. And as societies grew more connected and information spread faster, controlled exposure emerged as the modern evolution of ancient secrecy, because in a world of oversharing, restraint became power, and those who revealed everything lost the ability to shape perception, while those who shared selectively guided narratives with precision, as seen in political figures who released information strategically to dominate news cycles, or industrial leaders who revealed innovations gradually to maintain advantage, understanding that once knowledge is public, it can never be reclaimed, and that timing transforms meaning, turning arrogance into humility or weakness into strength depending on when the truth is revealed. And to all of this, one principle quietly separated legends from footnotes: outcome obsession, the relentless focus on results rather than recognition, a mindset visible in conquerors who abandoned tradition when it failed, in inventors who discarded beloved theories when evidence proved them wrong, and in reformers who compromised methods without compromising goals, because history does not remember intentions, it records outcomes, and those who clung to being right were often destroyed by those who were willing to be effective, adapting strategy without emotional attachment to process, changing course when reality demanded it, and as these traits intertwined across centuries, they formed a pattern not of villainy but of survival intelligence. A way of navigating a world that has never been fair and never will be, a world where emotional reactivity is punished and strategic calm is rewarded, where those who understand human psychology protect themselves from manipulation, while those who ignore it become tools in someone else's design. And the greatest irony is that this intelligence was never meant to dominate others, but to free oneself from domination, because the most dangerous tyrants were not those who understood these principles, but those who wielded them without restraint or responsibility, while the most valuable leaders were those who balanced strategy with ethics, power with accountability, and influence with restraint, understanding that intelligence without wisdom corrodes everything it touches. And so the story of dark intelligence is not a celebration of control but a warning written in blood and ink across centuries, reminding us that power will always exist, manipulation will always tempt, and psychology will always shape outcomes whether we acknowledge it or not, and the choice has never been whether these forces operate, but whether we understand them well enough to defend ourselves, to make clearer decisions, to detach from destructive attachments, to communicate with precision, to wait instead of react, and to pursue outcomes that serve something greater than ego. Because in every era, from ancient courts to modern society, those who mastered themselves outlasted those who tried to master others. And the true inheritance of history belongs not to the cruel or the loud, but to those who learn how the game is played and refuse to be played by it.